a symbol of the American dream left to rust in the Amazon jungle.
Is this some kind of movie set? What the heck is this doing here?
Concrete monoliths scattered across a forest in Europe.
Who needed to build something so well protected?
A fortified corridor of death stretching for miles across Germany.
To keep their country existing, they had to turn the entire country into a prison.
And a bold, gravity-defying contraption.
I think engineers come from all around the world to see this mobile sluice gate in action.
Once they were some of the most advanced structures and facilities on the planet, at the cutting edge of design and construction. Today, they stand abandoned, contaminated, and sometimes deadly. But who built them and how? And why were they abandoned? On the edge of the Amazon rainforest, down the Tapajos River in Brazil, is a utopian dream frozen in time. $2.5 million acres of this hilly and rocky land was once its own sovereign state run by a foreign corporation.
Imagine rowing down a Brazilian river and you come to this site and you see these abandoned buildings. And all of a sudden you come across a purely American fire hydrant.
You would be quite surprised to see Cape Cod cottages, swimming pools existing in the middle of the Brazilian jungle. It would be quite a stark contrast.
Looming over these houses is an iconic water tower that rises 164 feet and dominates the landscape.
Is this some kind of movie set? It would really play with your head because you'd be wondering, what the heck is this doing here?
Who built this replica American Midwestern town in the middle of the Amazon basin? And why was it then deserted? The roots of this town can be traced back to the technological revolution at the dawn of the 20th century. The global expansion of the motor industry was hampered by the British monopoly on rubber. Nowhere was this felt more than in America. Henry Ford, the father of the affordable motor car, had a vision for his empire, to make it self-sufficient. The key lay in obtaining enough rubber at a decent price to sustain and grow his automobile company.
Henry Ford is the consummate businessman. He's producing cars. Cars require tires, and rubber's expensive. So he has this idea, I'm not going to pay high prices for rubber. I'm going to cut out the middleman and create my own rubber factory, because after all, it grows on trees, in the Brazilian rainforest.
He looked to a location 3,000 miles away from the car plants of Michigan, amongst the rubber trees of the Brazilian jungle. This is Henry Ford's American dream, a home away from home, Fordlandia.
Everyone knew that Henry Ford thought big. That was his reputation. So when he sets out to build a factory, no one's surprised when he actually says, no, I'm going to build an entire town.
The purpose of building the town there would be to create a rubber tree plantation in which a large concentration of rubber trees could be cultivated and farmed as a cheap source of rubber for tires.
In 1928, Ford began his ambitious plan to build the largest rubber plantation in the world. This would, he hoped, meet the growing demand for his automobiles, such as the recently released and highly popular Model A.
Fordlandia was actually quite large for its location. Housed over 2,000 people, had a dance hall, a hospital, almost as if you took an American city and plopped it down in the middle of the Brazilian jungle. It was quite a vision.
Raimundo de Souza Lisboa lives here in Fordlandia and is familiar with the mechanical beating heart around which the town used to revolve.
Então era um galpão onde era a fábrica, onde era a serraria, onde era a oficina, o grupo gerador da energia para a vila. Então isso aqui era o centro nervoso do projeto.
Almost the size of Yorkshire, this sprawling plantation and town boasted many of the benefits enjoyed by Ford's workers back in America. But this outpost of American engineering would have to take root in the middle of the rainforest, where American values and work ethics were alien to the local population. While Ford never visited, he tried to recreate the Middle America of his youth in this jungle city that bore his name. Ford did more than build a city. He created an independent state geared towards rubber extraction.
So the extraction of latex from rubber trees is very interesting. Over the course of the day, the latex will rise up into the tree. So the workers would have to go out early in the morning when the latex was very low, tap the tree, and extract it.
The liquid latex was then mixed with diluted acid, which coagulated to form rubber slabs that were pressed through rollers to remove excess water. Today, the traces are all but gone. But once, these factories were set up to process thousands of tons of rubber a year.
The achievement that Henry Ford reached with the Brazilian government would be that Fordlandia was almost a sovereign state within a sovereign state, that no intervention would occur, and they would have almost carte blanche to run the town as he saw fit.
This might be a classic case study in cultural insensitivity. Henry Ford looks and sees what is working in America, and I'm going to superimpose that in Brazil.
Exporting mainstream America to the Brazilian jungle was easier said than done.
Era uma disciplina militar. Aqui tudo era, tipo assim, rígido. Era uma disciplina muito rígida.
They were not allowed to drink alcohol. They were expected to garden, attend regular square dances, eat specific food, completely alien to the people that were living in Fordlandia.
And guess what? Doesn't turn out so well.
Trouble was brewing deep in the Amazon rainforest. Equipped with all American mod cons, this should have been a working man's paradise. Yet Ford's dream quickly became a repressive nightmare for the town's residents. And it reached boiling point in 1930.
There is complete mutiny. They go out and they cut the telegraph wires. They chase the managers and the cook into the jungle. The Brazilian army has to come in and sort things out. They had simply had enough.
So these strict guidelines ultimately backfired because the people of Fordlandia just refused to live in such a fashion that was so strict and draconian.
It was not just Fordlandia's town that was doomed to destruction. The plantation fared little better.
Cortaram a floresta toda, não plantaram a seringa junto com a floresta. Então a seringa ela é suscetível à praga quando ela é plantada sozinha. E foi o que ocorreu. Houve o mal das folhas.
Ford knew automobiles, but he was no biologist. His team in the Amazon consisted of top Ford factory-trained men, but lacked rubber specialists. His bid to industrialize the biological world ended in catastrophe. Unknowingly, the seeds of Fordlandia's failure were sown right from the start.
Henry Ford failed in his attempt to manufacture an alternative rubber source that planted the trees side by side. That's not how you do it. They're prone to disease, and there's a domino effect. When they're too close together, they all die. The whole thing just wasn't very well thought out.
Already teetering on the edge, Ford's high hopes for Fordlandia finally came crashing down when synthetic rubber flooded the market. For all of his $20 million investment, virtually no rubber was produced.
Fordlandia ultimately failed not only due to the lifestyle restrictions, but also economic reasons. Synthetic rubber came about such that the economic advantage of growing your own rubber trees, that advantage no longer existed.
In 1945, Fordlandia was sold back to the Brazilian government for just a little over $200,000. Its sawmill, hospital, houses and streets were abandoned. For 60 years, it lay eerily derelict, a ghost town of enormous proportions. But today, Fordlandia has been partially reclaimed by the local population as a ready-made place to live.
American culture has been exported to the entire world, but that was done by choice. People chose little bits of it because it was intriguing to them. But we have forgotten the era when we attempted to superimpose what we thought was best on other cultures. We did do that, and Fordlandia might be the best example of that cultural insensitivity. And I don't think we should forget that.
Over 5,000 miles away in rural Germany lies the remnants of a truly extensive structure. Surrounding the town of Hottensleben are strips of plowed earth, knotted metal, and crumbling concrete.
It was a very unique and specialized structure.
9 feet high, fortified concrete walls topped with barbed wire enclosed swathes of open land, all watched over by menacing towers. What was the purpose of these intimidating constructions, and why are they still here? Their purpose can be traced back to the demise of the Third Reich. With Nazi Germany's defeat in 1945, the country was divided amongst the conquering powers. Democratic Western Germany ruled by the Allies, and Communist Eastern Germany by the Soviet Union. But the borders were open, with no walls. The Soviets sought to protect their border and their ideology in the shadow of their great Western rivals.
At first, the West Germans did not recognize the existence of East Germany and would openly defy the border in terms of provocative visits, as well as things that would do to intentionally irritate the East Germans.
With the Cold War in full swing, the openness of the border dramatically changed on May the 26th, 1952. To protect the Eastern Zone, the Soviets built a true manifestation of the Iron Curtain. The Inner German Border Defense, one of the deadliest borders in history.
When Winston Churchill said an Iron Curtain has descended across Europe, this is what he was talking about.
32 times longer than the Berlin Wall, it ran for 866 miles, cutting through a huge chunk of the country.
The scale of the border defense was enormous. It went from the Baltic all the way south to the extent of Germany. Some places kilometers wide, with stretches of land that were completely devoid of trees to prevent people from gaining any cover.
It is from somewhere behind this steel barrier that attack would come should the communists employ armed force to press their dream of world domination.
Yet, far from acting as a launching point for an attack on the West, this wall served a very different purpose.
This had nothing to do with a military defense line, whatever the East German government said. This was totally oriented, as the Berlin Wall was, against their own people.
The communist regime dictated every aspect of life in the German Democratic Republic. Despite its name, it was neither democratic nor a republic. With no free elections, no division of powers, and no freedom of movement, it functioned as a dictatorship, enforced by a repressive secret police, the Stasi. With more than 100,000 employees and a vast network of informants, they spied on the population and crushed opponents, often covertly disrupting their personal lives. Floods of people desperately tried to escape to the democratic West. A mass exodus, however, would be disastrous for the East German economy.
East Germany was a pretty vicious place. To keep their country going, existing, they had to essentially turn the entire country into a prison.
This is where the free world ends and the communist dominion begins. For this is the frontier of freedom.
To try and prevent escapees, the Soviets started construction in 1952 of what they call the anti-imperialist wall.
The construction of the border defenses came in phases. Early on, it was very small and modest, but then as tensions grew between the East and West, significant effort was put into making the border defenses larger and more fearsome.
Dr. Susan Baumgartel and her family lived in East Germany behind this very wall.
The fortification consisted of two fences. One to the western side was called enemy wards, and it was a metal grid fence. Next to this outer fence was an anti-vehicle barrier, and in front of this was a 6-meter plowed strip to see footprints of refugees.
Citizens fleeing across the border were treated as criminals, and if caught, were heavily fined and imprisoned for up to 3 years. Yet it proved an ineffective deterrent. People continued to attempt this dangerous crossing. So the defenses became ever more elaborate and brutal.
In addition to a wall, you had watchtowers, command posts, electronic sensors. They cleared brush, trees, villages, everything so that they had a clear line of sight and, sadly, a clear line of fire.
More than a symbol of an oppressive regime, for the many who wanted to escape, it was a murderous reality. Now a manicured stretch of land, it is hard to imagine this was once a death strip. And it was indiscriminate, running through farms, coal mines, towns, and even houses. Nothing was allowed to stand in its way.
So similar to the Berlin Wall that split Berlin basically in half, the defense border split communities along the border, in some ways completely destroying homes, and the economic activity was completely destroyed as well.
By 1961, East Germans, country of 17 million people, they're leaving East Germany at the rate of 1 million a year.
Over time, the border developed from a protected frontier into an elaborate fortification system. Combined with the newly built Berlin Wall, the number of people escaping to the democratic West was slashed to almost 2,500 per year.
So as the border defenses were increased in size, the buffer zone between the border itself and almost like a no man's land was increased. More guard towers were added, minefields were introduced. Tremendous amount of resources were put into creating a effectively iron curtain in between East and West Germany.
Through the 1970s and into the 80s, it reached its peak, with 30 guards patrolling each 3.5-mile stretch.
This is the inner metal grid fence facing the east. It has on the inside, there are thin layers of wire that were electrified. People were trying to climb over the fence. They would touch these wires and an alarm would go off.
60,000 anti-personnel mines were developed, specifically to deter border crossings. Yet 48 people still attempted this perilous crossing and were killed or injured by these mines alone.
Over its life, hundreds of people were killed trying to cross over from East Germany to West Germany. They were shot, stepped on landmines, attacked by guard dogs.
But it wasn't just civilians who tried to flee. Even the East German border guards sometimes deserted their posts in the hope of making it to West Germany. Soon, escape attempts were no longer necessary. A series of revolutions across the Soviet Union's satellite states in 1989 caused a chain reaction. It culminated in the demise of this Iron Curtain, immortalized by the fall of the Berlin Wall on the 9th of November 1989. With unification, the Stasi's extensive surveillance files, held on millions of East Germans, were laid bare for all to see, with every citizen able to inspect their personal file.
The beginning of the end of the Soviet Empire. Within 2 years, East and West Germany were reunited, in many ways coming full circle and ending what World War II had produced.
Everybody remembers the images of the Berlin Wall coming down. The inner defenses, it wasn't quite so dramatic.
With the reunification of Germany, many of the defenses in this border zone just fell into disuse. Many were dismantled, trying to encourage economic activity between East and West Germany.
Much of the inner German border defense was dismantled, creating millions of tons of debris. 45 years to the day after it was opened, the wall was officially abandoned. Today, this section is a memorial to its dark past, as well as a unique nature reserve. Once a notorious death strip, it is now home to a wealth of diverse habitats and species.
The preservation of the border defense structures with the barbed wire and the towers, I think, are helpful reminders for future people about what the history of East and West German relations were like.
Today, it doesn't necessarily look all that impressive or all that scary. It's just a strip of greenery with a little road running through it. But you have to remember that when it was active, it was a death zone for anyone who tried to escape.
Over 500 miles away in East Poland is a secret forest complex. Hidden under the canopy, camouflaged amongst the pine trees, mammoth structures sprawl across an area covering 1,500 square miles.
You're in the middle of a Polish forest and you're hiking along. The last thing you expect to find is a concrete jungle. What's this doing here?
These just suddenly appear from amidst the trees. Who needed to build something so well protected?
These immense windowless giants grow in size to 43 feet high and 69 feet wide, with few hints to their true purpose.
Walls are so thick, it's as though they've been built to withstand, some sort of apocalypse. But what?
Why build this foreboding complex in the middle of thick forest? And why has it been abandoned to nature? The answer lies in the early years of World War II. By October 1940, Hitler's expanded Third Reich had swallowed up much of Western Europe. However, having failed to gain air superiority over the Royal Air Force, the Nazi invasion of Great Britain was postponed. And in June 1941, Hitler turned his attentions east with Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. As the Nazis embarked on the largest military operation in history, crossing vast tracts of land, Hitler needed fully functioning bases of operations near the Eastern Front lines. He looked to the Mamerki Forest.
Hitler knows that he is going to be fighting modern industrial warfare. And when his people create command and control facilities, they make the most technologically enabled facilities that you see anywhere in the Second World War.
The largest and most impressive of these fortified command centers was this, Mauerwald, German Army headquarters. From here, the Army's high command controlled the war on the Eastern Front.
It was a fully functional military town and it had to be defended, so it had barbed wire, minefield, posts for gunners.
What they build in the forest of Poland is a mirror image of Berlin. Hitler himself has got his own bunker and staff facilities, and that ensures that when Hitler is away from Berlin running the war, Hitler is still able to retain his tight grip on power over the Nazi Empire.
Just 13 miles from Hitler's bunker, nicknamed the Wolf's Lair, top secret construction of Mauerwald was underway in the fall of 1940. To prepare the site, military engineers drained marshland and cut down swathes of trees in this mosquito-infested forest. In case the enemy should discover the facility, they spread the bunkers out over a vast area.
It was to reduce the risk. If you had an attack of paratroopers or a bomb, it could have decimated the entire thing at once. So they spread them out to reduce that chance.
This military city sprawled across the Mamerki Forest. Made up of 3 sections codenamed Fritz, Brigitte Anna, and Quell, they were dedicated to operations, logistics, and communications.
It was all very orderly and laid out as if it was some kind of, bureaucratic operation and not a central hub of brutal warfare.
Items of most importance were housed inside reinforced concrete bunkers, while staff and personnel were billeted in more temporary accommodation made of brick or wood. Born and raised in the local area, Bartek Plebenchek manages the site.
So you have to imagine that all the area was full of the wooden houses and were camouflaged by the plastic tree which were put around these wooden houses or on the top of this roof of this bunker.
Real thought went into the camouflage of this complex. There were artificial trees for different months of the year, coinciding with the changing seasons.
The bunkers were extremely well fortified. But what was really unique about these monolithic structures is that the rooms themselves were very tiny. It's as though they anticipated some sort of military cataclysm, and they were built to withstand it.
The walls of these bunkers are 7 meters thick, and on the top of my head, you have 7 meters of concrete. This bunker is getting smaller inside, but rooms are really small. But the comfort is not the key area here. The most important thing is to be protected from the bombing, so it gave you 100% chances to survive.
To reduce the chance of Allied aerial bombardment, the engineers added seagrass to the concrete mix, which accelerates the growth of moss, providing the bunkers with a natural and fast camouflage. And it had another unexpected benefit.
Seagrass is able to incorporate into the outer surfaces of the buildings in order to stop the concrete chipping.
In the summer of 1941, 40 generals and 1,500 officers and personnel moved into Mauerwald and engaged in their top-secret work both day and night, managing the ever-expanding German army.
German traditions of command and control mean that the general goes off in a car or a tank and commands in the field, but that he's backed up by a chief of staff and a huge number of staff officers who stay back in a headquarters in radio contact and run the army while the general runs the battle.
To keep up morale deep in this Polish forest, Hitler insisted that this concrete fortress be made a home away from home.
One thing that's striking is just how big it was. 200 buildings, bunkers, air raid shelters, but also a lot of things you would associate with a small resort city. They had a movie theater. They had a casino close to the front lines on the Eastern Front.
Hidden in this remote location, well away from key towns and transport routes, it was imperative this complex be fully independent.
As a military headquarters, it had to be self-sufficient. So they had their own power plant, they had their own heating plant, they had their own supply of water. They could live, they could survive, cut off from their supplies for a long period of time.
Over the course of 3 years, Hitler spent a staggering 800 days in the concrete bunkers of his Eastern Front headquarters and Wolf's Lair.
When Hitler made his intent clear in the briefing rooms of the Wolfschanze, the senior officers would then get into their cars, drive over to Mauerwald, and they would put it into practice.
Nazi army personnel were successfully concealed within this complex for 3 long years, through bitter Polish winters and scorching summers. Yet it wasn't enough to prevent the failure of Hitler's misguided venture in the East.
No matter how good the German officers are who worked in the Mauerwald, they could not fulfill the twisted, unrealistic ambitions of Hitler.
By the autumn of 1944, Nazi Germany was fighting losing battles on 2 fronts. The vengeful Red Army was hot on the heels of the retreating Axis forces. In January 1945, Hitler's staff had no option but to flee the complex.
The Germans had no choice but to retreat, and quickly. So Mauerwald was just left intact, a ghost town.
Hitler's retreating army had only 48 hours to escape Stalin's forces, leaving no time to sabotage their concrete city. Unlike the nearby Wolf's Lair, Mauerwald was left to the forest, fully intact. Today, these concrete monoliths, just a short trip from the hugely popular tourist attraction of the Wolf's Lair, are virtually forgotten. Yet they survive as the most complete example of Hitler's forest command centers.
What we see today is just the scale of the ambition of the Nazis to dominate Europe and the time they were willing to put into building infrastructure and everything else they needed to extend their military reach is impressive and horrifying at the same time.
Across Europe, in southwest France, lying in the region of Montec, is a mystifying construction. Cutting through this deceptively flat land is a 20-foot wide concrete channel. Over 400 foot long, it's partially filled with water. Yet clearly not a canal lock. Its purpose is initially baffling.
Engineers come from all around the world to see this because there's something quite, I don't know, maybe hypnotic, mesmerizing about it.
The gradient of this slope is just 3%, but its full length of 443 meters gives a total incline of 43 feet.
It sort of defies logical explanation, but yet they built it.
The channel is flanked by two unusual 8-wheeled vehicles. They are connected by a metal frame and large panel weighing 200 tons and suspended over the water.
This might be a terribly impractical design, but it's also kind of inspiring.
It's so Heath Robinson. We're all used to seeing water cascading down under gravity, whereas suddenly we're using a very simple mechanism to get water uphill.
What is this strange contraption? And why is it here, intact, yet abandoned? 1600s, trade between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic still relied on a treacherous month-long passage around the coast of Spain. As far back as the Roman Emperor Augustus, leaders dreamt of linking the two seas. Finally, the 1660s saw the birth of the Two Seas Canal that would eventually cut through France with 270 miles of canal to increase and speed up commercial traffic. Yet at Montec, the canal had a flight of 5 locks, and this caused congestion and frustrating delays.
The canal lock, the ability to take a boat and raise it or lower it so it can travel by water up and over hills, is one of the greatest advances in technological history. The problem is each one needs to be filled or emptied as you go through the process, and it's time-consuming.
Christian Moretto of the French Waterways Network is in charge of canals across this region.
Un ouvrage expérimental a été construit permettant aux péniches de commerce de franchir une série de 5 écluses par un ouvrage unique.
3 centuries after the Two Seas Canal project began, French engineer Professor Jean Aubert produced this revolutionary contraption, the pont d'eau, or water slope.
The French water slope was an absolutely revolutionary alternative to the traditional way of using locks. They brought the boat into this section at the bottom of the slope, enclosed basically a very large puddle of water around the boat, and then moved the puddle up the slope with powerful locomotives. In a way, it's absolutely crazy, but it's also kind of brilliant.
Built in 1974, this pioneering water lift could carry fully loaded barges to its peak at 43 feet.
The principle of the water slope is actually very simple. If you were trying to bail water out of your sink, for example, you would just use your hand and basically push the water out. And what you're doing is you're raising the level of the water at some depth, and then it kind of goes over the side. With the water slope, you're starting from a level plane and you're going up an inclined slope. So the principle is the same. You use a mechanism to shunt the water up and create a body of water that's deep enough for a boat or a barge to actually float through.
To push 53,000 cubic feet of water up a slope along with a loaded barge takes masses of power.
Donc la motorisation, c'est ce moteur V12 là. Donc il fait 1000 chevaux. Et ce moteur entraîne une génératrice qui permet donc de pouvoir apporter l'énergie au déplacement.
What I love about the pont d'eau is that you can see exactly how it works. It's all there in front of you. It's a channel that a barge will come into and a gate shuts behind it.
Once this barrier shut behind the barge, it created a watertight seal trapping a wedge of water. The barge would then float on this wedge or puddle of water as it was pushed along the now enclosed channel.
And then, powered by 2 great locomotives on either side of that canal, they slowly roll forward on tracks, bringing the gate with it. And as that gate pushes up along the canal, it pushes water with it.
The engine units traveled at 1.5 miles per hour using a pushing effect of 63 tons, equivalent to a whopping 127,000 pound-foot of torque. But how do you control this much raw power?
La position du pilote donc est ici. Il a besoin pour la manœuvre d'avoir une vision panoramique de l'ensemble. Et puis il contrôle donc mécaniquement le déplacement de la machine au moyen de ce bouton poussoir qui est ici.
Moving over 1,000 feet on a concrete monorail, these enormous wheels took 6 minutes to complete the journey.
2 locomotives on either side of this trench start dragging this dam up the hillside until you get to the top. Then you open the gates there and the boat sails happily on its merry way.
Thousands of boats weighing up to 250 tons apiece passed along the water slope in a puddle of 1,500 cubic meters of water.
I mean, I love this thing. I love the simplicity of the engineering behind it. But it's 1970s technology. These 2 whopping great big diesel engines slowly pushing canal boats uphill. It just isn't 21st century technology.
Between the locomotives, the construction of the slope, the water seal to prevent the water as carrying the boat from just running away, all of these things put together make the reproduction of this extremely difficult.
For 35 years, the water slope served the Two Seas Canal, lifting over 10,000 boats and traveling a distance of nearly 2,500 miles. In 2009, however, engine failure sealed its fate. The only contraption of its kind in the world, it was deemed too expensive to reproduce the parts needed to keep this unique machine running.
Not every cool engineering idea really turns out to work in the real world. I think the water slope is an example of that.
Really, it was out of its time. So had it come at the time when canals were really the life vein of the industrial world that we lived in, perhaps we would have seen hundreds of examples.
A lack of demand and repair costs mounting up to almost £4 million ensure that the water slope remains motionless and abandoned. Today, it continues to draw visiting engineers from all over the world. Engineers fascinated by this bold creation.
Even if it wasn't a particularly successful invention, I think engineers need to be reminded every so often that they need to break out of the tunnel vision of this is how things have been done for a long time and actually create something really extraordinary.
Now abandoned, they were once on the cutting edge of human engineering. Within these decaying structures are the echoes of history. They speak of war and terror, but also of exploration and human endeavor.